Hi, everybody. I hope this finds you well and having enjoyed the conference so far, and thanking the Witherslack group for putting everything together in the format that they have. I was thinking how useful it is that we've had the information this morning with Colin around thinking about how we can avoid those feelings of rejection and how we can support some really feel-good factors around dopamine and getting involved in those activities, and then how we've looked at some of the behaviour management with Rory and Rob earlier, and thinking about how we can be detectives, and that all really kind of puts in some positive foundations for where I can pick up, which is really thinking about how can we consider moving forwards in a really positive way for our pending summer holidays. And you might be a bit like I used to be, thinking, oh, is this the calm before the storm? But for me, it was also often marking the end of work, the end of teaching, the end of sort of term time. But actually, it might also be a time where you're thinking, how will this go? And so I think it's really important that we sort of just take a bit of an emotional deep breath ourselves and think, in terms of, we're going to be thinking about days out, and we are going to be talking about how we can pack the right bag. But I think we have to consider our own emotional bags. So have we got something in our emotional bag that we can sort of sip along the way, and we can get some energy and some sort of refreshment from? So it might be, you're just planning one night a week to actually sink into a deep bubbly bath and get that planned in, so that the kids know, actually, this is your time and the door is going to be locked, and even just for 10 minutes you're going to lie there. Or is there a way that you're thinking, how can you recharge your batteries? What are you going to be doing in order to maintain your energy levels throughout summer holidays? What can you do to plug into that recharge? It might be a case of thinking, have you got your survival blanket to sort of wrap around you, and what does that look like? And then, what are we doing about maintaining energy levels? So I'm not saying you need to have an energy bar about your person and be physically ingesting food for energy, but just thinking in terms of our own survival plan, especially for days out. I think we live in an era where, as parents, we can overcommit to things. We can try and fit in with everybody else, you said, schedule. But what we want to be doing is thinking about what's going to be the best, most positive survival schedule for us and our particular family and our particular circumstances. And so one of the things that I did to sort of prepare for this new episode of our lives, of our summer holidays, is to sort of put together a bit of a plan. And it might be that you think about doing the same sort of thing, but it's got to be personalized to you and your family and your children's needs. So I thought about, right, well, what personal jobs will we still need to do? And a reminder sometimes for our children of what's going to be the same throughout the summer holidays can be a really positive start. So what personal jobs will still be happening? So we've got on here things like bed making, having a shower, doing your teeth, putting your toys away, helping with the laundry. And then also we've got a family jobs column as well. So thinking about helping with the meals, helping with the dishwasher, those sorts of things. And then I added another list in here. And this is the earning a pound jobs. Because my thoughts were, actually, if we're going to be having days out, then the likelihood is that some of them, not all of them, but some of them may have a cost to them. So if we can do things like sweeping the leaves or a bit of weeding, helping with some of the jobs around the house that need doing anyway, but actually earning some money for those, then that's really helping our children to sort of buy into that feeling of autonomy and that feeling of being part of that building up chances for days out and being part of those earning opportunities as well. So really good for that self-esteem and that self-valuing and confidence building, and feeling like a valuable member of the family and that you're contributing and helping with that. And we've talked a lot this morning already about thinking about behaviour and how we can be detectives around behaviour. So I'm going to just put a little brief reminder out there of the fact that for all of our children, all of these cogs are turning, and each of these cogs need to turn when we're experiencing change. And of course, transitions and days out and activities all involve these cogs turning, those new environments, those new experiences. So we're understanding that for many people, those cogs turn more slowly. For some, some of these cogs may turn very rapidly. And for some people, those cogs don't necessarily turn very succinctly. So it really means sort of processing those environmental changes and experiences in a very unique and individual sort of way. And I think sometimes when we are considering how we process these cogs very individually, then remembering actually that they're not necessarily deficits, they're differences in the ways in which we are experiencing things. So I actually like to use Smarties, and it's no coincidence that the colours of my cogs are the colours of Smarties. And whilst I'm not on commission or anything, I just have found that these coloured sweeties are quite helpful in reminding our children of their strengths, of where they are smart. So they're smart in their communication skills by doing X, Y, or Z. They're smart in their interaction skills. Their sensory system is very smart. And so really kind of reminding our children, taking this opportunity to remind our children of what they are good at, what they can focus on, what they can do well, and reminding them that actually, as Dr. Luke Bearden says, you know, his philosophy is around the fact that actually their neurodiversity and the environment added all together equals our outcome. So the more we can understand the neurodiversity and the impact the environment is perhaps going to have, then the more we can set up for a successful outcome and hopefully enjoy some of these days out. Because by recognizing those skills and abilities, we're perhaps more able to predict the types of activities and the types of experiences that our children may enjoy, but then at the same time, the types of things that they might find difficult. And I know in my experience, I've had some experiences where actually a day at home is what we need the most. And I know children, and, you know, listening to yourselves today and some of your questions, you know, some children that are very reluctant to leave the house, and actually their best days are their days at home. So it's about how can we motivate them into being brave enough and bold enough to actually step outside of maybe even their room or their own home or their environment. And sometimes these kind of approaches of reminding our children what they're good at and where there'll be a chance for these skills to be engaged, then that can be really successful. So it might be that your best days are going to be the days at home, but then can we remember what there is to do at home? Can we remember the opportunities that we have just around the house? And of course, when our children have been so used to a term time of structure and schedules, and even if they're homeschooled, you know, there's a more of a kind of systematic routine to their day, then actually having this sort of open space in their life can, for some people, be a little bit overwhelming. So it might be that we need to think about structuring and formatting some of those more free experiences. And one of the ways that I've had success in doing that is to just outline the sort of things that might be at home. So I've done a cloud here, and we've got things that we can do inside. So we've got things like board games, construction, drawing, reading, puppets, so just the regular toys and activities that you might have round about your home. So just listed in one place. And then on the other side, we've got things that we could do outside. So it might be digging in the garden, it might be playing with bubbles, or we've got some old cushions that we have outside for kind of, you know, throwing around, might be chalks. So just thinking in terms of like, well, what can we do outside? And having those outlined in those, what I always call them the quick reference pictures. So yes, the words underneath, but the quick reference picture is so that actually we're not calling on all of those cogs to be turned and to be engaged and to be processing and decoding. Actually, we're calling on one of the strengths of our neurodiverse brain, which for most people, research tells us is around those visuals. And I know our friends at the ADHD charity and the National Autistic Society and PDA Society, we all talk, you know, it's lovely. And hearing the Witherslack staff this morning talking from the same song sheet, that actually we know the power, we know the impact of using visuals. And if we move away from all of those societies and all of those professional research and advice, and just think about ourselves, we use visuals all the time. You know, we use them for traffic lights, we use them for driving the car, we use them in the sat nav. So visuals are a very natural way of engaging and coping with our world and our environment. So the more we can do those quick reference pictures and help our children to just click what it is that's available without having to engage all those cogs turning, then the more likely they are to be willing to engage in those activities. And of course, life does not always run smoothly. And I know even just yesterday, I made a plan, and I thought the irony of doing today, because I made a plan to go off to an activity, and then I realized when I checked my email that actually my payment hadn't gone through. So we had a bit of a hiccup and a few whoopsies to our day. So it's never always going to go smoothly. And I was back to that bag that I held up earlier, thinking, right, what can I sip on here? Some deep breaths and some visiting our schedule and remaking our plans. So what kinds of things might actually interrupt or prevent our children from being enthusiastic or keen to participate in those days out and those activities that we're trying to encourage them to participate in? So just have a look at this picture, and I'll just give you literally a minute to just think yourselves, really, what can these three things possibly be responsible for in terms of stopping three different children from participating in what should have been three really nice experiences? And I'll reveal them in a moment. But I just think it's nice sometimes to do exactly as we've talked about this morning and get inside the hearts and minds of the children that we live, love, and are engaged with, because by doing that, we're in a much more strong place to create successful opportunities for them and enjoyable opportunities. So I'll share the experiences of these three little pictures. So this first picture is where a family were attempting to go to one of the ice, skiing experiences, which are kind of dotted about the country. And the family knew that this particular child would actually really enjoy this, that her skiing on holiday and things like that had been really successful. But it turned out that actually one of her real challenges was to wear more than one layer of clothing, and especially if that clothing moved around a bit. Of course, on holiday, they'd actually hired ski gear, and so she didn't perceive that in the same light as she did her regular clothes. So for her, her sensory processing, and also her perception, her understanding when she feels cold and when she needs to wear a coat, was a real challenge. And so the family actually set up a really fabulous homemade thermometer, which marked where you needed to wear what types of clothes. So sometimes just thinking in relation to what's going on in our child's personal experience can be really helpful. And this middle one, this is a little one who actually really struggled with the multitasking, those kind of things that we commonly link to what's talked about as executive functioning skills. So, you know, can I hold on to my ice cream, talk to my nana, and navigate the uneven surface all at the same time? You know, is my frontal lobe going to be totally overwhelmed by actually expecting me to do all of those things? So thinking in terms of what exactly are we asking our children to do? What really is this? You know, this is not just about getting an ice cream and walking along the beach. There's some other things going on here that we need to be mindful of. And then it might be, as for this child, that actually the last time they had a really lovely, creamy chocolate milkshake, it actually left them feeling quite nauseous and quite sick. So for them, the idea of having a drink out was enough to stop them from wanting to participate, because they were anxious about how that might go for them. So thinking in terms of what's going on inside of our child's hearts and minds as well can be really helpful. And by doing that, we can then apply the same sort of approaches that I mentioned for ourselves. Like we can kind of preempt and prepare and have things on board that can be really helpful. So we're addressing, you know, I often talk about them as sort of pebbles on the beach. And often there's a quote around, you know, it's not the big rocks that we can see ahead that we trip over. It's those small pebbles that we sometimes stumble on. And it may seem obvious because of the way that those neurodiverse cogs sometimes turn. It can be a really good idea to have a bag available at home that's there. It offers consistency, it offers that concrete sort of transitional tool. So it's there all the time. And, you know, as one parent commented to me that, you know, her child needs that rucksack as her survival sack. And so, you know, I think being selective and you know, about what we leave in this bag is also really important. And thinking about the fact that, you know, if we are going to be putting in the bag things to support our sensory system, being mindful actually, what is the sensory system like for our children? And I know one little boy that actually ear defenders that had been provided were just not sufficient. You know, they didn't block out the noise because his misophonia, so his ability to hear really detailed sounds, but some that he found absolutely intolerable, other people clearing their throat, chewing or swallowing, those kinds of sounds got through those regular strength earphones. And actually, you know, he needed some purchased from a farm shop equipment provider. So, you know, real strong decibel blockage that he required. So thinking in terms of how can we put those right things into that bag for our particular child. So it might be that, you know, we need some reminders of the kinds of things we can do that make us feel calm. So some maybe deep breathing or some hand cream for hand massage, Lots of children may have activities that they enjoy doing that they find really relaxing. It might be, you know, a Rubik's Cube there, just as an example. This is not a list of what to put in your bag. It's just some ideas to generate our thinking, and to think in terms of, you know, is there anything particular with our sensory system if we need to think about what we're chewing and what we're chewing on, and is there something we could give in place, and have that available, not just for going out, but having it available at home as well, so that everything's in one place, so that when we are perhaps even getting anxious at home, especially during the holidays when things aren't that same routine, there's not that same sort of comfort blanket of structure and familiarity that many of our children really do need. But actually there's that opportunity for something there that just helps them to feel safe and secure. And I'm thinking, you know, as I'm saying all this, oh, pack a bag, try a bag, I realise and appreciate that actually creating a survival sack is a really positive thing, but actually it's not necessarily the answer to all our thoughts and perhaps ideas and maybe even worries and concerns around coping with the summer holidays. And wouldn't it be a joy if everything was just as simple as packing a bag? But, you know, what if your child needs that level of input and planning and preparation for a successful trip to their relatives, or for a lunch out, or to the local park? And perhaps for your child, thinking about how we can plan for that and how we can put that in place. And I know, you know, a bag that can be used in the garden, can be used in the park on holiday. If that bag has got some familiarity because we've accessed those things at home, then it's much likely to be an assistance, as it were, when we go out. And if you think about it, we've got, I often think that that anchor, you know, we're offering an anchor here in what might be an otherwise worrying experience, or might be a time when our children's confidence levels aren't quite at that same point. So, and I think in terms of, you know, we've got such a tolerance, haven't we, as a society, in thinking of like security blankets and even dummies for little ones and soft toys. But we seem to have this sort of societal until a certain age, and then for some reason when things get to our children get to a certain age, then we deem that things aren't appropriate. But actually, if you think about it, we'll all just change what we do. You know, we've swapped out our comfort toys, our activities that help us to feel safe, for mobile phones and water flasks and handbags. So there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be thinking in terms of setting our children up for success by putting lots of these opportunities in place for accessing and using that sort of survival sack at home, so that they can then use that as part of their transitional tools for successful days out and successful experiences. And so I think one of the things that can be helpful for getting our children to, encouraging our children to have those opportunities and experiences outside of the home or outside of their room even, is to think about, yes, it's not all about packing that bag and then everything will go smoothly, but what else can we do? And maybe it's thinking in terms of, can we flood our children with more positive thoughts and ideas that might alleviate their worries and concerns? And I do always have concerns about sometimes the conversations and the terminologies that we use around our children, so that we're not always mindful of the fact that they're very astute hearing, which needs ear defenders, means that sometimes when you're on the phone to somebody or you're discussing with someone who's popped round, some of the experiences that you're having with your child could be quite negative. And so I think it's really important that during the holidays, especially when our children are there more, they are present more, that they can often pick up on some of those conversations and texts and emails. So just being more mindful of the sorts of things that we are discussing around them can be really helpful. And I think sometimes using some statistics and some data can appeal to our children's logical and systematic thinking. And we're often ready to use information to plan for days out and to prepare for days out. And it might be that we even need to go back to reminding our children of maybe a time when they went to the park. You know, it might not just be reminding them of a positive holiday experience or something nice that happened, but actually thinking in terms of, remember when we went to the park. So I really want to encourage you to be accessing some old photograph albums, or maybe even printing a few pictures from last year's holidays and activities out as a bit of a reminder, and looking at the online information that we can access before we even think about having days out, and thinking in terms of the fact that actually perhaps we could invest more time in planning and preparing for those little outings. You think about it, often families will say, you know, I can't believe it, I was really anxious about X holiday, maybe, you know, big holiday to Florida or wherever, and actually it went really well, but try and get, you know, Jamie out to the park round the corner, and it's really, really challenging. So, you know, why is that? Is it that we naturally put a lot more planning into that big trip rather than the same really level of planning into those smaller transitions? Because like I said at the start of this talk and what we've heard already today, we know that for many of our children, you know, turning all of those cogs, not necessarily succinctly, can be a real challenge for transitions and new experiences. So the more comfortable we can make things, then the better. So it's about getting in our child's hearts and minds, as I've already said. But in order to do that, we need to be really thinking about why my child might be reluctant to participate. And I loved the fact that we've heard this morning Rob and Rory talking about the fact that parents are the best advocates, that are the best and most knowledgeable people in terms of their children. And that is so true. So it's likely that you do know the kinds of things that your child worries about. But then what I want to do is think about, well, we might know that, but how can we alleviate it? How can we alleviate those worries? And I know about things for the children that I live and work and experience, is part of their worries are, when are they going to have their next turn on their screens? Because gaming and screens, as we know from many of our children, are quite a big event in their lives. So another child I know who used to worry, didn't want to go out of the house because they didn't know where that iPad might be when they get back. And then another child who was worrying about, well, if they went out and they had the day out and they normally allowed 2 hours on their machine, on their screens, then when are they going to get those 2 hours? So we've got some real kind of work to do here, haven't we, in terms of understanding those worries for our children, because for us we might be, you know, tempted to do the, well, don't be silly, you've had such a lovely day out, you know, you don't have time for your iPad today, and that doesn't matter because you've enjoyed, you know, the theme park or the water park or the activities that you've done at the beach. So yes, you might have had a good time, but actually, if for our children these are those pebbles, these are those things that we might stumble on, then doing a little bit of preempting and preventing that might just be the key to our children being willing to be a little bit more proactive and confident in participating and in getting involved. So for one family, simply having the basket by the door for the iPad to go in on the way out was a really helpful thing, so that their child wasn't worrying about where it was. So that alleviated that worry. For another family, they actually had a little sack that they used to take their screen along with them, and would timetable into the day little opportunities for a turn on their screens, because for them, their child not to have that access and that activity was a big deal. And for some people, actually being out of the house, away from the screens, is in itself a really great opportunity. So for others, it's about helping achieve that balance. And for some, it's about just getting into our head where that screen needs to be stored. And it may be a schedule is needed just to say, actually, it's going to be a screen-free day today because this is what we're going to be doing instead. But then you'll get your screen, a bit of screen time tomorrow or in the morning or whatever. But what we're really thinking about here is preparing and working on schedules in such a way that it's going to support our children in actually understanding what's going to be happening next, but without them panicking about some of those things that they value, that are the most valuable and the most important to them. And they might not be to us. You know, screens and things drive me mad. I've no interest. I don't want to sort of participate, but, you know, I'm trying at the moment to get my head round a few roadblocks, terminologies and activities, because that's where we're meeting our children very often, at their interest. And if we meet them at their interest, then they're more likely to be willing to be flexible and to participate in some of those activities that we want them to enjoy and be involved in during the summer holidays, and to be a little bit braver in leaving those activities behind or changing from those activities. But making sure that actually we've got that structure and that planning in place. And that thinking about planning is not just the outing, it's not just getting them involved in being able to do that, but it's actually the returning home as well. So it might be about preparing for that homecoming. So what will we do when we get back? Reassuring our children of what will be the same. So giving that sense of security. It might be about rehearsing. It might be having a bit of a run through, pacing through how things will be and some of the possible experiences that we might have before we actually live that event or live that experience. And often a practice run at home, using some activities and some toys, you know, if we're going on a farm visit, getting those farm toys out, having a talk around the noises, the smells, the other people, and the experiences that we might have, and thinking about those, thinking about, well, how can we alleviate that? So if we know that our child has got a real sensory profile around new smells or different smells, then how can we preempt them being able to manage that? So can we make sure they've got some of, you know, perfume or aftershave or a smell that they like on their jumper, so they can put their head in their jumper and sniff that if they need to, so that we've got some preparation in place for avoiding some of the experiences that might then take us back to that previous slide where we've got those little hiccups, those pebbles in the way where we might trip up. So having those practice runs can support our children's understanding of the expectations and of the likely experiences. And, you know, highlighting your knowledge of being tuned into them, highlighting your understanding of where they are at in itself is a really good, a really positive start. And thinking about making sure that our children know that you know that they'll need to have perhaps a breakaway opportunity. So a kind of, you know, get out of that situation, and that they can get out of that situation by doing X, Y, or Z. And that there's going to be opportunities for movement if they need it, that you're aware of their sensory needs, that if you're going in a cafe, that you will reassure them that you're going to sit somewhere where there's an exit if they need it. So you're really sort of on board and understanding their needs and knowing what it is that they might want to ensure is in place to make the experience more positive for them. And I know earlier this morning that we had a mention of social stories. And of course, when we think about those social stories and the fact that Carol Gray, and it's worth looking on her website to make sure that we are using social stories in the way in which they're supposed to be used, which is very much about revealing what a given experience might be. So, of course, they really lend themselves to supporting our children in having an experience of an activity or a day out or something out of the norm, something that engages with those cogs being challenged in a new environmental experience or a transitional experience, which is inevitable if we are thinking in terms of doing things during the holidays outside of their normal routines and experiences. But I always say, you know, we've got to approach the way in which we do things with an awareness. So, you know, that caution, let's just stop a moment and think caution with putting these strategies in place. So we don't want to dive straight in to using things like social stories to support that experience, that given understanding, that given experience, because there's a danger that we go off kilter and we start and use language like you should, or it's important if, and we always. So, you know, being really mindful if we are using a social story that we've got the right safe language in place. So do have a look at Carol Gray's social story guidelines if you do want to think about how you can support the revelation of a social experience properly and appropriately, rather than using other strategies which might be around, you know, rules and guidelines of what you want to happen, which is not the same as a social story, because we need to be thinking about keeping language safe. We're not going to be using directives in this kind of social revealing. We're going to be using just one or two gentle guides around what the experience might be like. We're not going to be saying you must, and this is what should happen. We're going to say things like lots of children enjoy eating ice cream. But that doesn't mean to say, and we're not going to add this into the story, but the point I'm making is that we're not telling our children that everyone must have an ice cream or that everyone must enjoy ice creams or even have a turn on the slide or whatever it might be. I'm going to be using language that describes that experience and sort of shares that perspective by being very humble in our social information and making sure that we're just really peeling back the layers on the what's likely to be happening, who it's likely to be happening with, why we're actually bothering to do this. You know, sometimes for our children, actually sort of, you know, people call it sort of stating the obvious, but it's not stating the obvious for our children. It's actually just making it make some sense. What's the point? Why are we doing this? And then also thinking about, well, where this environment is likely to impact and when it's going to happen and what is a likely experience. So revealing that work context is really important. And, you know, the fact that the why is really important. You know, why is it helpful to have a day out or to go somewhere and do something? Why do we need those experiences? What's the value of them? And why can't we just stay at home? And I often think that I often work with families who will say things like, you know, she doesn't really want to move outside of her bedroom. And I know, you know, we've already talked this morning about the importance of being a detective and working out why that's the case. And sometimes the answer is kind of in the very in front of our eyes, and it can be around the fact that our children don't know why we would bother and what that experience might be like. So sometimes just revealing the possibilities of a new experience can be really helpful. So I think, you know, for our children, it's about practicing creating something that's familiar, can be a really good bridge to get them from that situation where they really want to stay in that same predictable environment. And so thinking about if we can practice creating that familiar. And I know Dr. Gary Mezibov, who is one of the real gurus in the whole world of autism, neurodiversity, and a real director in that cradle to grave division teach approaches like schedules and start and finish boxes and those activities that have a real clear structure to them, and a real advocate and talks about familiarity being our friend. And I think if we can create a friendly familiarity at home, and then the experience that is unfamiliar is minimized. So I've just used here an example of a picnic. So we might be at home having lots of really positive, nice picnic foods. And those foods hopefully will be familiar foods that our children enjoy. So we could maybe start off by just having those foods for lunch at home, and then maybe having them in the garden at home, then having a picnic rug out and sitting on the ground with them on that picnic rug. And then, and only then, when that established pattern is comfortable and familiar, that we then take that whole idea of a picnic and the picnic rug out to the park or out into the environment. And so then we've got some nice familiar anchors, and anchoring the familiar can be really helpful. When we talked about building that bag, that survival sack, that's the same. We're talking about anchoring those familiar opportunities and experiences for our children. And when we can do some of that anchoring the familiar, then it's more likely that our children will feel brave. And we want to build that resilience. We don't want to have our children growing into adults that are reluctant and unhappy and challenged by going out. I've been working currently with a couple of 20-plus-year-olds who've been absolutely wonderful in supporting you. We've been kind of talking and supporting a longer diagnostic journey. And one of them said to me, you know, she loved the fact that when she got to university, she kind of could decide how much participation and opting out she did herself without anyone really pushing her. But she said that she wished that she'd actually engaged more and participated more, because it left her quite isolated. And she said at the time she felt that that isolation was what she needed and what she wanted. But actually now, sort of in her older 20s, she wished that she'd kind of built up that network of people so that she wasn't quite so isolated. So sometimes it is about us being flexible in our thinking in terms of supporting our children and taking these very small steps approaches. And I had one woman recently said, you know, she'd taken her child off to buy some new shoes for the summer, and she said, you know, that in itself was enough to make her think, that's it, having any more days out for the rest of the summer holidays. And I really do understand that. I do get that. And it is about, exactly as I said at the start, it's about us being brave enough as well and choosing a time when it's right for us, but taking these small steps approaches. So it might be you've already made commitments for things you're going to do in the holidays, and hopefully, you know, something you've heard today might just make you kind of think back a little bit to actually what is it that you know, we can do to set this opportunity up for a more successful time during our summer holiday experience together. So it might be thinking in terms of that survival sack. What does that look like for me personally? Have I got my own parent survival sack in place? How am I going to recharge my batteries and keep my energy levels at a point where things are copable? So thinking in terms of not over planning, not over committing, managing our expectations and keeping those expectations real. And then thinking in terms of putting a anchor bag in place, a survival sack for our children, so they're familiar with that, they're accessing that at home, it's good, it's in place, it's there, and they know where everything is and they can get in there and use it. And if they're not doing, then we need to revisit it because it's not got in there what they need to keep them engaged. And I'm not talking about snacks here and these kinds of things that you need just for that particular experience. I'm talking about their regular sensory supports and activities that will help to regulate their days at home and days out as well. And it's such good practice for our children to have them at hand and to get used to reaching for them themselves. So not having to say to them, oh, I can see you getting a little bit upset. Perhaps, you know, you need to wrap yourself in your blanket, or do you think your ear defenders might help here? You're really getting our children used to accessing those themselves. You know, this is a great opportunity, the school holidays, to put some of that really good practice in place and get it well established. And it might be thinking in terms of a separate bag for your swimwear if you're going off to the pool or something like that, and helping our children to have some possession over packing that. Running through things at home and having that practice. So thinking about how can we plan and practice and prepare. And I know I smiled earlier when Colin mentioned that, you know, he was a drama teacher in his other life. And I think, you know, that's so great, because actually that sort of role playing and working through and practicing, you know, it is really, really valuable in terms of giving our children confidence in their experiences. So, you know, planning those routes, maybe even making a map and marking on that map what those experiences might be. So I know when I mentioned the farm, you know, remember there might be different smells, there might be different noises. So, you know, we're gathering that information and we're sharing that information, that reassurance, helping our children to, you know, stick on their map those exits and those arrows and things that mark where they may need to get away or where they can actually escape to. And using, you know, the family calendar, so scheduling things ahead so that our children know the days when they're going to be home and this is what's going to be happening, and then the days when there may be a change or something might be different. So using those reminders, perhaps using postcards from a previous trip or photographs from a current trip, maybe, you know, a picture of an ice cream to remind our children that they actually did enjoy that. So using those quick visuals, those quick connectives, rather than having to get those cogs out and get them all processed before we even work out what it is that might be happening. So we're using that, really buying into those strengths, those smart cogs that our children actually have. And thinking about how we can foster that familiarity. So practice that picnic, use that same meal, maybe even taking your own bedding. If you go into an Airbnb or somewhere like that, taking not just the teddy or whatever's familiar, but actually taking your own pillowcase or something like that. Thinking about how you might use social stories, and thinking about how we can establish new day out routines. So will screen time happen? When will screen time happen? What if bedtime's going to be later? How will that feel? What will that look like? What about meals? Are they going to be different? Is the experience of what sort of food we eat going to be different? And if we're allowed treats, well, how many are we allowed? And when can we eat them? And when can we not eat them? I know some families who, you know, will say, right, well, that's your snacks. And then the child might get in trouble because before you even arrive at wherever you're going, all the snacks have been eaten. And I know I've done many a school trip where the children have eaten, you know, wanted to eat their lunch on the bus on the way to wherever it was that you were going. So thinking about establishing a realistic routine as well, and what that might look like. So I hope that we've touched on some things today for making some of those experiences, whether just going back to that, you know, whether it's going to be thinking about setting up something for at home that's going to look comfortable for your children, or whether it's thinking about how we can create the familiar and transition that into days out, thinking about how we can make successfully approach planning for days out, and hopefully sort of taking home some hints and tips that might just support some of those experiences going well and feeling comfortable. So I know we've got a lot of questions in today, and I'll try and answer one or two, but of course it's always tricky when in this situation we are answering questions in a very generic sort of way. So if you do have a very personal question that you want answering, then my contact details are available from Witherslack, or you can see there as well. You can just go on my website, which is Ideas Afresh, or my email, which is just annemarie@ideasafresh.co.uk for any personal questions. Okay, so I'll hand you back. Sorry.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. Lots of useful information there and good tips, so thank you. And the first question we've had come through is, I have two neurodiverse children and find taking them both out together overwhelming, as both have different needs. Plus they trigger each other. I'm really anxious for the holidays. Do you have any advice?
I know it's that kind of old thing, isn't it? Do we divide and conquer, or unite and stand strong? And I think, you know, it's about doing what's right for our individual families. There's no right or wrong, and it's about surviving in the best, most possible way. The most important thing for our children throughout the whole of the holidays is that we manage to do that calm, confident, caring, and loving parenting. And however we do that, however we achieve that, is actually going to be the best experience for all of us. So I think thinking if there is something at all, you know, thinking back to those smart cogs, sometimes there's a kind of merging of one thing that our children might enjoy doing together. It might be as simple as drinking the same, you know, drinking an ice cream, drinking a milkshake or a soda. So, you know, could we literally just take the two of them out, you know, into the garden to start with, to have a real treat? You're not normally allowed a can of pop or, you know, a soda. So thinking in real small steps and not trying to achieve what you know is unachievable at the moment. Go back to what you can do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne-Marie. The next question is, do you have any teenager relevant examples that we can give to children about why we should go outside the house with parents and carers?
I think being really realistic, going back to data, talking about the fact that actually in real terms as adults, it's the reasons it's not appropriate and it's not okay, and as society we can't just stay locked in our homes, that actually it limits our experiences. And I think for many of our children, it's going back to that. If we try and think in terms of what do we just know about that whole experience of leaving our home, what do we just know is the value of that, and revealing those values to our children and helping them to sort of buy into that by understanding what the long-term outcome is. And I don't mean saying, you know, you need to be able to go out when you're an adult and get a job, because they might say, well, I'm going to work from home, I'm going to work virtually, which is, you know, what we're doing today. So it's about really revealing the realness and the truths around why that is important, and how most people find those experiences fulfilling and valuable. So I think, you know, revealing the values of things.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Anne-Marie. The next question is, the holidays are the worst time of the year. What advice can you give for working parents who have to juggle holiday, childcare, work and parenting?
You're absolutely right. For many families, holidays are the worst time of the year. And for some families, they're the best time of the year, because some children actually enjoy that lack of challenge and time restricted experiences. And so it's about working out what's best for your family. And it might be a case of putting in place during the holidays some of the strategies that you have during term time. So, you know, I haven't got it here with me today, but I know one family that I helped put getting this family on the road activity into place, and it was just literally a picture of a car wheel, because the boy concerned was really into cars, and we just cut the car wheel up into portions, and then put on each percentage of the car wheel what it was that we needed to do in order to get the family out on the road. And I think, again, it's about being realistic. It's about making it clear what's happening and why it needs to happen, and, you know, manipulating things to be most appropriate for your family, and making sure that whoever is involved in childcare actually has got a fuller and complete picture. And I'm just looking here for an example. So here I've got I know somebody mentioned earlier about, I think it was Rob saying about one-page profiles and those kinds of things. So making sure that that information is on board for anyone involved in supporting your family through the holidays, and putting some reminders together. So I had put a reminder together for a young lady who, when on an activity, I don't think it's so easy to see, but this is just a key ring reminder. So when she was going out for activities, she would forget about safety crossing the road. So she would just have this little reminder in her pocket that took her through those safe steps of actually crossing the road. Because when she was excited about going somewhere, all of that good road safety went far from her mind. So I think it is just about making sure everyone has got as much information, the right tools, and we're setting people up for success when we're having to involve childcare and work, and also making sure that our children understand why we're going to work. Why are we leaving them? And, you know, Colin talked about that whole area of feeling of rejection, that we're not leaving them because we don't want to spend time with them, that actually we're leaving them because we need to earn money and what that's for. So again, setting out that just know information hopefully will help.
Yeah, great, thank you. And we've just got time for one more from this came across on email. What would you suggest for my child who suffers with social anxiety, which tends to get worse over the holidays due to being out of a routine? Even getting him to come and do a food shop can be near enough impossible. Any advice for managing this sort of anxiety, please?
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, kind of really working hard on that familiar, creating the familiar. So rather than going out for a whole food shop, just thinking of one item that you could go out for. And so you're really building on those familiar small steps. And I know sometimes that can be, really challenging. And some people might be there saying, well, that's all well and good, but all we can do is start from the best place, most positive place we can start from. And that will be starting from that first little moment of success. So what can we make familiar? And what can we do to reinforce that familiarity? So practicing at home, I really can't endorse that enough, that whole practicing so that we feel secure, we feel comfortable before we're expecting our children to even just go for a food shop. I even think I could spend a whole hour talking about what the real experience of going for a food shop for some of our children may actually be. And it might be, we're thinking just going for a food shop, but for many of our children, that is a huge experience, similar to a week's holiday. So starting off with that very small steps approach and creating the familiar first, creating the secure, creating the confident, creating the familiar.